Hello, I am Jason, better known as Jay the Ninja. I am one of the contributors to LuxBlend and the LuxRender project documentation and all that fun stuff. You've probably seen me around Blender Artists or the Blender sub on Reddit, and I am here today to do a brief tutorial and preview type thing to show off all the stuff we have coming down the pipe for LuxRender 1.3. Primarily, this will be focusing on the node editor, and we'll cover some other items as we come across them, just in the process of making the node editor look cool. I wanted to focus mainly on the node editor because, well, one, it's the part of all this that I've been working on since my coding powers are nowhere near good enough to actually work on the engine itself. And plus, the node editor is a feature just a lot of people have wanted. You sit down in front of cycles and like, hey, wow, this is really easy. Snap this, and hey, look, there's my shader. And then you go and look at the old LuxRender material editor, and it kind of sucks. The thing is, though, that a node editor for external renderers hasn't been something that's possible to do through Python up until now. It is the new feature in Blender 2.67, which at the time of this recording we are a few days away from the release candidate 1 release. To get started with the node editor, you will obviously need a 2.67 build of Blender. You might be watching this and that's already out by now. At the time, like I said, we are on the eve of RC1. The call for builds went out on the mailing list earlier today. But in the meantime, you can just grab something from Graphical or the build bot, like what I have here in front of me, which is just R56187, which I believe is 4 or 5 days old. I think it's from last weekend. So we have here the default cube. Our render engine has already been set to Lux. I have the new add-on installed. And over here in the material editor, you see mostly things are like they were before, except these two things. We have a parameter link here where we can grab a node tree, and we have a button that will add a node tree. The way Python nodes work in Blender 2.67, you don't actually modify the existing node editors. Those are hard-coded, and you got to recompile Blender if you want to change them. What we do instead is you create new node editors, and scripts can create as many of these as they want for whatever they want. So we have created one for LuxRender node material editor, and to use it, you need to create a tree in that editor and assign it to your material. That's kind of a pain to manage, so we taught LuxBlend to actually deal with all that for you. Just push this handy button, and it will create a new node tree, give it the same name as your current material, and assign it to the current material. And it will also set a fake user on that node tree because you can't do property linking in Python. So this is actually kind of just technical mumbo jumbo I'm going off on this point. But basically, we have to set a fake user on all the tree entries, which I guess I should pull the tree up now. This is it here. As you can see, basically, don't unlink this or else you'll lose your node setups. And that is just the limitation of Python for right now in Blender. So, moving on. You see we have a material output node here. The material output node here is fairly similar to the one in Cycles. We generally tried to keep to the conventions of the Cycles node editor when it made sense to do so. Just to make sure if you use Cycles, you should already feel at home using this. So, instead of Cycles where we have, the surface, the volume, and the displacement outputs, we have 4 sockets here. Surface, interior volume, exterior volume, and emission. Volumes do actually work in LuxBlend. Hopefully they will be working in Cycles soon because, like most UI, I want that feature too. So, at the moment in this current build, the emission output in Lux is not working. It should hopefully be working by the time the actual final release of LuxBlend is done. But for now, you have surface and volumes, which should cover most uses. To get started, I think we should probably add a material to the node tree. And if you hit Shift A, like usual, brings up the add menu, and you get here, you can have, inputs, the material output node, as usual, have one of these per node tree, just like the compositor with Cycles or Blender internal materials, same as always. And for your main materials, we have them all contained in this nice little list here. And I will select just the matte material to get started. And grab that, plug it into surface, and we now have a gray matte material. Let's save our project. And, obviously we can grab here and change the color of it. And we have, normal node sockets. Plug in whatever you feel like to these. Of course, the matte material is great for clay renders and not a whole lot else. So I'm going to go ahead and hit X to delete that node and add a new node with the glossy material type. Now, glossy is sort of a more realistic material and is going to do a much better job of making the realistic surface than I'm going to be doing for demo part 1. So I'm going to go ahead and grab there to split the window. And I'm going to delete the default cube, replace it with a cylinder, assign my material to that. I'm going to rename this tree bark because I'm going to be making a very simple tree bark shader with this. So first of all, we're going to need some UVs. There we go. That's good enough. That's actually terrible UVs, but it'll work. And let me drop back to object mode here. So at the moment, we just have a simple gray glossy shader. We have the diffuse color, which is set to 64%. We have the specular color, which is set pretty low. Generally, in Lux Render, you want to keep the specular color very low. It's tied into the refractive index of the actual surface coating. So for now, we're going to go ahead and leave that at 0.04. Let's add a texture. We do that, we just drop down to the texture set here. We find the image map texture. Go ahead and create one of those. Strap it onto diffuse color. And we're going to pull up the file search here. And grab our tree bark texture. So, let me add a quick ground plane underneath it. Just so our scene looks normal. And jump back to there. And let's give this a test render to see what we have currently. It's a bark-covered cylinder. So as far as the general bark look goes, it's not too bad. It might be better if we smooth shaded the cylinder. And of course, if we had the texture repeat a bit more. So let's just take care of that for now. Escape out of that. Going to add a quick edge split and smooth it so we get a nice smooth cylinder. And next thing we want to do is make this texture repeat a little bit. You might notice the 2D coordinate input on the image map texture, a lot like the vector input on Cycles textures, and you have, to plug into it, these two nodes. Image map is a 2D node, so we're going to grab the 2D texture coordinates from our input nodes list. Plug that in there, and increase use scale to 3 by 3. Give this another test render. That's looking a bit better. You got some nice little texture repeat there. I'm going to zoom the camera in on the cylinder so it's a bit easier to see. There we go. So at the moment we just have a diffuse texture. And diffuse textures are wonderful. They're the important texture. But really it would be better if we had, say a bump map. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a copy of that node. Switch it over to my handy bump map I have in the folder here. Now the problem is you might notice bump is a gray or float input and we have only a color output on image map. While the node editor will actually let me do this, if you actually try and export this you're going to get an error from LuxRender because it doesn't like you trying to feed colors to float inputs. So we have in the image map our little variant toggle. We click here. Now we have image map texture in its float mode. And we can just connect that up, and LuxRender will be very happy with us. And currently, this texture is not including our repeating we have in the diffuse texture. So to do that, we'll just hook that up like so. And this is a bump map, so we're going to go ahead and turn gamma correction off. Filtering and wrapping is fine. We'll leave it the same settings we used there. Now, if you try and do this, it's probably going to have a funny scale. We'll just try it to see what we get. Yeah, you can see we have some pretty odd shading artifacts. which are most likely coming from the bump map. See if we disconnect that. Yep, you can see we get rid of the bump map. Shading on the side of our cylinder goes back to looking good. So the reason for that is we messed the normal up far too much compared to the geometry, so we need to scale that down a little bit. If you go back into textures, you'll find the handy bump map node. If we plug that in like so, attach our bump map to the bump value input, attach the input over to bump, we can now adjust by height, and in fact, if you turn on units, you see you actually get a nice realistic height. And if we render this, wonderful. We have a little bit of a surface bumping. You can always add a little bit more. It's pretty hard to see in that shot. I'm going to go ahead and take it up to 1 centimeter there. By 1 centimeter, it means full white would become 1 centimeter higher than full black. And since our texture does not really include that much contrast, we're probably going to want to overscale that just a bit. See, we have a visible seam there, though, so that was probably too much. So I'm just going to go back to 2 millimeters, and since this is a tech demo, we're going to call it good right there. So the third thing we want to have is, why not a specular map? I'm going to go ahead and duplicate our image map texture again. I'm going to go ahead and leave color and gamma the way they are. We'll keep it in color mode. Don't forget to hook up our coordinates so we have our repeating, so it matches from all our nodes. And of course, since we're sharing this in all the texture nodes, if I wanted some extra repeat, we can just do there, and it's automatically pushed to everything. Now, if we just connect image map up directly, we're going to get some pretty funny results. Like I said, specular color in Lux is an IOR. It's not expecting big values. So to do just that, we can scale it down a little bit by going down to Utilities, grab a scale node, hook it up to specular color. And we were using a 0.04 for specular color before, so I'm going to go ahead and just scale our texture values down to 0.04. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit higher because our texture doesn't actually go to full white. Let's give this a test render and see what we got. Looking pretty good. It's, obviously a cylinder on a plane with a wood texture. But you can kind of get an idea from this of what your basic workflow for bump, diffuse, and specular maps would be. As you can see, this is way easier than using the old material editor, which would have required 4 different textures stacked up in here. You could have combined this with like the bump map, socket input, and you would have to adjust this separately for each texture. So every time you wanted to decide you wanted maybe 5 repeats, you need to go into all 3 of these textures and adjust them individually, which is no fun at all. So that gives us our first very simple material, which was fun, but let's do something a bit more complex. Go ahead and make a new scene file here, delete the default cube, add Suzanne. I'm going to call this monkey. Actually, we're just going to call it monkey. And I'm going to add a little bit of Lux subdivision at 2 levels to the monkey mesh here. And then swing my camera back around. I'm going to lift this so it's above the ground plane. Add a proper ground plane underneath. And I'm going to go ahead and split this. Drop back to the node editor. And we'll add a material to the ground plane. Probably should have adjusted this name prior to attaching the node editor so I didn't have to rename them separately like that, but oh well. This is going to be our ground plane material, so we're just going to keep it a simple matte. Its purpose is only the ground plane, and we'll give it a little bit of sigma so it's has some realistic roughness to it. Let's deal with our monkey. We'll go ahead and add a material to the monkey, call it monkey, add nodes, and I think we should have a silver monkey. So we have 2 metal shaders in Lux, metal and metal 2. This metal is the simpler one. If we just want some actual silver, we can just grab the metal node, set it to silver, stick that on surface, And we can just render this as is, and we should have a silver monkey. Indeed, we do have a silver monkey. Now, we got a good bit of random noise in here. So I think this is going to be a good time to introduce another new feature in Lux. We have a new sampler. The Sobol sampler, and I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. I just suddenly had a crisis of thought here, recording this tutorial, that I really have no idea how to pronounce this. But I'm going to go ahead and flip on noise aware. And the Sobol sampler is a quasi-random sampler, which before we also had the low discrepancy sampler, which was also quasi-random, but it kind of sucked because it worked in sequences of a fixed number of pixels, and you couldn't stop the render unless you were in between sequences, and sequences had to be powers of 2. So if you decided 32 wasn't enough, well, hope you like going to 64. With Sobol, we don't have that problem at all. It doesn't even have any properties. It just does quasi-random sampling progressively and continuously. I believe it is actually based on Cycle's sampler. I may be wrong on that. They might just be based off the same research paper and not share any code at all. But that should give us a little bit of improved speed. And I'm also going to make this a bit more polished, because everyone likes polished monkeys. And I'm going to switch this over to sunlight. Grab our monkey so our nodes are back up there. That's looking a lot better. So the thing is, our monkey here is very clean and reflective. What if we wanted to tarnish the monkey a little bit? One of the other new features we can use to do that in Lux 1.3 is Lux now supports Vertex colors. So if we drop over into Vertex Paint, we can just use Blender's Vertex Color Dirt tool, which will give us some nice Vertex Color Dirt, and just store it in the Vertex channel. Now, the way we access that in Lux is if you go into Inputs, you will find 3 little nodes here: Vertex Colors, Vertex Mask, and Vertex Alpha. Mostly you'll be using these 2 here. Vertex Colors, which just pulls the RGBs, colors, and outputs them as a color output, and Vertex Mask, which is the same thing, but gives you a float output. We also have Vertex Alpha, which reads the alpha channel stored in vertexes, which I do not believe Blender normally stores. It is something we implemented in Lux in case. Lux is used with a number of other programs like 3ds Max and Poser. Somebody might have a use for it. So, in our case, what we want to do is blend between 2 materials with the Vertex Color Dirt. So we want the Vertex Mask, so we have a float output from our dirt. So to do that, we want to mix 2 different metals. We're going to need a mix shader for that. You can find it under the material nodes list. Go down to Mix Material, select that, swing our plug around, and we'll take Vertex Mask, hook it up to Mix Amount, and now we have our clean surface. And in the brighter areas of the material, we will get, actually, bright areas of the material will give us material 2. And we want probably our shiny silver shader, which we have here in the bright area. So I'm going to go ahead and move that down to material 2. And we'll put our tarnish shader on material 1 after we create it. Now, metal is limited to presets and NK data files. It's kind of nice to have a custom color for this. So to do that, we need to do something a bit more complex using the Metal 2 shader, which looks like this. We're going to create the Metal 2 node from the materials list, plug it in on material 1, and if we just render this right now, well, first let me increase its roughness there. If we render this, what we'll get is basically just a aluminum-like metal. It's probably going to be kind of dark since the IOR is low to start with. But what we can do with that IOR is plug in any sort of Fresnel input. You can find these down here under Fresnel data. And the one we want right here is Fresnel color, which allows us to specify whatever color we want and have it put an NK data set, like you'd find in an NK file, out to give you whatever color you want. And it comes in one of these special Fresnel inputs that we can just plug into our IOR there. And by the way, if you want the presets with the Metal 2 node, you can also use this node here, Fresnel name, which contains the same set of presets and the option for NK data files. So, back to our Fresnel color node here, though. I kind of want, kind of dark. So we'll set our reflection color like that for right now. And let's give this a render, see what we have. Lux power up here. Yeah, at least a couple samples of pixel. There we go. You can see the render is a little bit blurrier than what we had before. We got some blurring there, some dirt there. It's not the most prominent thing in the world, so maybe we should try darkening it and upping the roughness a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and pull that down very low. Increase that, and see if we don't get a better result this way. There we go. It's a bit better. You can see we have some more obvious dirt coming in around the ears here, and a little bit behind the eyebrow. Give that a refresh so it's a bit more clear. So, we made a tarnished silver monkey. Big deal. Let's put it in a pool. Because we can. We're going to go ahead and rejoin these two windows because we have to model a bit briefly. I'm going to keep this very simple, so I'm going to go ahead and add a cube. Scale it up a little bit. Give it a quick inset. Extrude down. And that's probably good. I'm going to take it in the ground plane and drop them both a tad bit. Drop the ground plane material on it, and that's probably fine. Go ahead and add a bevel modifier to this just to give it that extra realism. Okay. So, we have our pond. Let's put some water in here. Okay. Go ahead and add a new material to this. We're going to call it Ocean. Going to hop back up to the node editor here. Add a node tree to this. And to make this good water matte, we probably want to do the Glass 2 material. Glass 2 is kind of fun because Glass 2 is an empty shell for volumes. You may notice it only has a couple of flag options and a bump map input and really nothing else of its own. To give it actual IOR and color and all that fun stuff, we assign that from the volume. So if we bring up our list one more time, we find under the volume section we have a couple different nodes here. The one we want right now is the clear volume. We're going to go get that, plug that into interior volume, and just if we pulled up the matte preview now, you can see we have a glass sphere. It looks more like glass than water. So for starters, we're going to drop IOR down to about water. Actually, we'll go ahead and grab one from our handy presets. There we go. And since we have glass and caustics and all that fun stuff, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to Metropolis sampling now. We're going to need it. I'm going to test render this. It looks okay. It could look better. Let's add some absorption to it. If we pull back into the node editor, you can see the clear volume has an absorption socket here. If we take this node here, color at depth, plug it in there, we can then simply specify a color and how deep into the water we want that color. So let's do blue at 40 centimeters, or 0.4 meters as we've inputted it there. And by the magic of editing, we now have a presentable render about 45 seconds later. So you can see we now have blue water, matched our node perfectly. So we're going to go ahead and quit that for now, because this tutorial has already run longer than I planned it to. So So I'm going to show off one last feature before we wrap this up, and that is hair rendering. I'm going to go ahead and add a UV sphere. We're just going to make a big fuzzy ball in the corner. We go ahead and scale it down just a tad. Hit it with the quick fur tool. So if you scroll down to the bottom of the particles panel here, you'll see a wonderful LuxRender hair rendering tab we now have down here. You can specify hair size, the fact that you want to use the new strand primitive. I strongly recommend you never uncheck this box. And the tessellation mode, where I now have selected adaptive triangle ribbon. It's pretty similar to the fast planes option in Cycles hair rendering. We can also, if you would rather, you can tessellate it as a solid object. This uses a lot more memory though, and is not really going to make a difference for our little fuzzy ball here. Let's add nodes to the fur material, because we can. I'm going to give it a glossy node. It's sort of a dark color. And I think we're going to call it good right there. Let's give it a render. If you tried using hair in LuxRender before, you may have noticed that would have taken minutes upon minutes to export, and there wouldn't have been any children when it was done. That's the beauty of now proper hair support. Many thanks to the LuxRender devs who got that in work. I believe it was Dade who did the core support, and Neo who did most of the Blender exporting. So, that about wraps up our feature tour for now. I highly recommend you check out some of the GPU rendering videos elsewhere on the internet for LuxRender, because we have some very cool stuff planned there today, but that is somewhat outside the scope of this video, so I hope you enjoy. I hope you're prepared to get started with the node editor, because it has now been merged into the main LuxBlend release, so that means weekly builds starting now. And we'll include the node editor, so as long as you have a 2.67 build of Lux, 2.67. So as long as you have a 2.67 build of Blender, you can just drop the new LuxBlend into that, and your node editor is ready to go. So thank you for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.